River of Blood, one of the more capable teams. So here we see the river push. The valley push, sorry.
So actually, I was just thinking that River of Blood here is wide open, kind of taking a strange posture. The T1 there and J2 can only spot them when they come over the ridge, but with this kind of speed at this tier, that is too little too late. So if they do a good job of knocking out that T1, playing with a little bit of gumption and not worrying so much about being spotted, they can get in there before those Panzer 1Cs get back and absolutely rip them up. But it looks like they're not out of the valley.
Indeed.
Yeah, the push stalled quite a bit here. You could see that I don't know what they were definitely waiting for something, maybe for a late call at some point, but there definitely was a lack of decisiveness coming out of the valley.
So we see Ruukil is behind the Wadi back there, the only flanking shots there, and we know that the rest of Simp is in about J2. So there's Ruukil trying to get passive spot, trying to spot some of the members of the group, just to see where they are. The Bison firing on Ruukil, not quite getting the hits, but getting close.
This went from an advantage for Simp to a pretty strong disadvantage. It's going to be hard for them to walk their artillery up without putting him in a direct line of fire. They really need to get him to like H2 in order to hit behind that mountain in the right way. But if they're not careful... Oh, actually, a weird little push going on here. There's some pretty strong separation. I wouldn't be surprised if we see River of Blood just pick a line and push everything at it.
Indeed. We've got two guys coming up from the middle there, and we've got one T1 coming through the city, trying to get a bit of a surround, trying to distract these guys. And the 1Cs turn around, trying to figure out where the enemy's going to be coming from. But then, Plaid guys move up a little bit.
If those 1Cs do commit to the middle push, it could actually open up Simp quite well to finishing off this group.
Indeed. But Simp is not pushing in anywhere, and there's no...
Ruukil taking a little bit unnecessary damage there.
Maybe. And now the engagement begins. Some playing around a little bit.
There's
some
that
tanks.
T-57. Get in behind that rock. If he's able to lob shots for that, that's going to cause a problem for River of Blood.
But Bison takes him out. No problems. Canaduck right on the money, first shot. Takes the T-57 out, and Millard is dead. So... there goes Plaid's chance for artillery fire.
I think that single shot basically gives Canaduck MVP for this game because he pretty much clutched it with finishing off that 57.
Yeah. Canaduck's next shot takes out Ruukil, the only flanking member that's able to do damage right now on Plaid. The other one's being pinned behind rocks, and then the middle group moves up, but
very
it's
late push.
Yeah, very late, too late. Too late.
So there's two coming down the middle and two still in J23.
Indeed. So,
see, the problem is here is that when these pushes happen, they need to be happening together, and it just doesn't seem that it's working out that way for Sim.
There's a lot of disorganization you're seeing here, or maybe a lack of coordination.
Speed weaponry getting caught out in the open, easily finished off.
I think you're right here. It's really Canaduck kind of carrying this whole thing. Panzer 4s, or sorry, Panzer 1Cs versus those Cruiser 4s. Cruisers were actually coming out on top in the close quarters. Panzer 1Cs would have to shoot right by them in order to play to their own strengths.
The damage coming out of those.
Go ahead, Ruukil.
Thank you. The Bison was doing a really great job. He got the key hits that really put Plaid back in his place. Any advantage Plaid tried to go for, he just shut it down. So I'm going to load up the third match now, so I finished that one up.
Loading as well.
That kind of opens up an interesting opportunity, though. If you look at kind of how the response pattern was there, another sort of push from one side, followed by a flank, rather than down the middle, maybe the 0 line. So say Simp had taken those tanks from the middle and put them all the way down the 9-0, they would have faced very few resistance from those tanks there, and would have been able to maybe get in there and take out Canaduck, which I think is pretty clear would have been a victory.
Yes, if the push would have been on the 9-0, they would have definitely taken out Canaduck and possibly a T1 in the city.
Canaduck's
giving them
position
very
wasn't
open
exactly
shots.
stellar.
No, he was very open to anything coming down the 0 line and would have had almost no warning. I don't recall them having any scouts watching the 9-0.
They had one tank back in the city area, but
I think he was too low. I honestly think Zero Line may have clutched it for Simp in that last game.
And Canaduck is probably, well, the Artie for both teams seems to be one of the most important tanks. Being able to kill that Artie, or that Artie being effective, is really what decided that game for War, because they were able to get the damage on the right tanks, and the Bison is a fantastic tank, dealing lots of damage, whereas Millard has not been able to, I don't think, get out quite as much damage as Canaduck.
No, I think Canaduck definitely in these rounds, especially the last round, is proving his worth in that Bison.
Definitely. The
All
Bison.
ready.
Yep, I am ready as well.
I'm ready at 20.
Alright, so start. And we've got a slightly different loadout from Plaid again. They're bringing Panzer S-35s and one Panzer
Now that is really interesting. Yeah, S-35s are going to be very, very hard to penetrate from the front with Panzer 1Cs. From what I understand, I've never played a Panzer 1C myself, but off the top of my head, I remember the S-35s being rather tough.
Hey,
it's nearly
more
impossible.
than that, it's got a high fire rate and a lot of hit points. So this could be an interesting counter. It's basically going more tanky instead of immediately trying to counter with agility and similar lineup.
Indeed. These tanks,
rounds. Go ahead, Ruukil.
No, go ahead, you're going to explain.
Okay. I was going to say is with those Panzer S-35s, even with gold rounds on the 1Cs, they only have, if I'm not mistaken, about 43 pen with gold. And that is not enough to deal with one of those S-35s from the front at all. You'll notice definitely Simp making the move down the middle and paying for it, because this time War was ready for it, and they've done it 3 times.
Yeah, it's a very confusing move, if you ask me. The Bison didn't even bother trying to go to C4 this time. He went straight to AA8, prepared for this. They're boxed in directly behind that rock, which means the Bison right there just needs to chuck in rounds, whether he can see them or not, and they will make connections for damage.
Yep. And then Ruukil getting caught out there by Savagey, but not quite going down in the city. But then we have Doc coming in to finish him up, discovering the rest of them. And there's the...
There's a definite problem with the separation of the Simp team going into the town. I'm not exactly sure what was going on here.
Yeah, the separation to begin with, the lack of playing to your strength, I think, is a big problem here for Simp. What they wanted to do is initiate with the S-35 so that Riverblood had to waste its rounds on them, but instead they gave them the soft targets first, allowing them to eliminate all the support of the S-35s, which makes cleaning up the S-35s basically just an exercise in circle strafing.
I do feel right here that War is doing a great job completely encircling Simp, not really giving them anywhere to go, taking advantage of being able to shoot the S-35s from every direction, which makes that armor absolutely useless.
And also Millard, if you notice in the artillery, is running right behind the group, which is weird for me. I don't know why an Artie is running quite with the group, but he's running... usually you'd expect an Artie to sit back and support, whereas Millard seems to be playing that almost like a TD.
As some would say, the T-57 is the best tank destroyer of Tier 2. It's not exactly a bad idea. However, it's hard enough to fire one of those things point blank like that, let alone when you're being peppered with rounds. I think that's something that's kind of commonly underestimated, how hard it is to shoot when, you know, your tank is just getting completely racked up. Whether it's damaging modules or not, it's still a lot of noise and your screen turns red and all that stuff. It's very distracting.
Indeed. So, third round.
If I remember correctly, you're going to see Savage get some very wicked air going after 07 here. And definitely some wicked air there.
Evil Knievel is jealous.
Indeed. And that will be...
It was almost a tank stacking Goomba. That would have been awesome.
Yes.
But I think it's pretty straightforward that War definitely was more prepared for Skirmish 13's finals than Simp was.
Indeed. They brought a really good lineup, and they definitely executed it perfectly. Panzer 1Cs taking the key positions, dealing the damage where they need to, and being very flexible, along with having a great Artie support from Canaduck. So I think that will wrap it up. That's War taking Skirmish 13, 3-0 versus Team Plaid. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and thank you for joining me, Naga and Trouble.
Anytime, bro.
Thanks for having me, bud. It's fun.
Cool. And if anybody out there has any questions or anything about Skirmish 13, I guess now is the time to ask. So we're just going to give them a second for that.
So how about that awkward silence, guys?
Indeed. I should probably fill it with a question or two. What did you guys think of the whole setup, actually? The whole requirement. It was tier 3s, no heavy tanks, of course, and Lakeville.
I'm sorry, Ruukil. I might actually have to ask you to restate that question. I was having some sound problems. I was fixing a stream.
Sorry. What did you guys think of tier 3 as far as, you know, this map? Did you think that the Panzer 1Cs were especially strong on this map as opposed to maybe those the British tanks? And how do you think, we already talked about the Arty, but do you think the Bison was really as the most effective tank? Would you give MVP, for example, to Arty?
During on this map, I do definitely think having one Arty at least in the lineup is very important. If I'm not mistaken, the Bison actually also has better range than the T-57. I know the T-57's range is very, very poor. Not saying that the Bison's isn't, but Bison does bring quite a bit of firepower. The T-57 does definitely have its perks. Whenever you get into close, if you have 1Cs closing on you, you can definitely defend yourself much more effectively with a 57. But I think with an aggressive push with 1Cs, the Bison is definitely the right choice. I also do feel that the Cruiser 4s are great tanks. They truly are very, very good tanks. But a 1C versus a Cruiser 4, I would take the 1C any day of the week. The problem is that while the Cruiser 4 has quite a bit of firepower in its 4 rounds, it cannot clip out a 1C. And on the other hand, the 1C can clip out the Cruiser 4 because the Cruiser 4 has absolutely no armor. So they don't even really need to focus on where they're shooting, placing the flak shots. Every flak shot's going through.
I think that's the biggest advantage that that you mentioned there, right there. The Cruiser, while it does a lot of damage, you have to stop and aim, whereas you can just drive right by with a Panzer 1C and light it up. And a couple of them doing it at once are going to drop some tanks. Once you have a couple tank advantage, that's when you can just kind of play side to side, if you even have to. Fortunately for River Blood, they weren't really ever in a situation where they had to get that technical with it. Mostly just because anytime they had any sort of engagement, they just dropped tanks so quickly that it was really hard for Simp to kind of come back from.
Yeah, that's it's quite a powerful tank to 1C. To be fair, I mean I've messed around with them quite a bit, do platoons of 1Cs and tier 3s, and the firepower on them is really understated. Their capabilities to deal with tanks, especially British tanks or any tanks that are not very, very well armored, is almost unbelievable. Unless you're bringing, like Simp did late in the game with those S-35s, those 1Cs are just going to tear you up. Like you said earlier, is if you drive 3 or 4 1Cs past the target, just spraying into them, you're going to drop 1 or 2 tanks. There's no question about it. And beyond that, now those 1Cs are gone, clipping out, and they're coming back in.
Indeed.
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I do remember some tanks down there having some pretty strong derp guns. I think those might have been a little bit better of a choice than the Cruiser 4s myself. What is it? One of the Americans. I think the M2 has a pretty nasty little howitzer on it, like 170,
I believe you're right.
Something like that. Now, if you put 2 of those next to each other, they both shoot once. That's a tank down. If you support them with either Panzer 1Cs or Cruisers at that point, you're taking away enough of the firepower, which, in ideal circumstances, you can kind of share hit points and take an advantage there, or at least make them too scared to drive around the corner for fear that they would eat around like that.
The gun you're talking about is the 75mm howitzer M3, which is on the M2 medium tank.
The one thing is especially with 1Cs, is when you're in that city in Lakeville, you're talking about some true light tank flat cannon heaven. You can get, I mean, anybody who's played French tanks in tournaments, driving a 5100 in the city is like a magical experience. And now you have 1Cs, especially when you bring, I believe they were bringing 4 1Cs. Your clip time, I believe it's somewhere around 10 seconds. You poke your nose out, do a lot of burst damage, disappear, go around the block, come around from another side, put more burst damage in, and you can just keep playing with them, especially if your enemy's bringing slower tanks. You can really take advantage